Thanks for joining us today for Building Resiliency on the Farm. We are really excited to share with you a couple of areas that you can improve the resiliency on your farm or thinking about resiliency on farms in your community. For today's event, I'm going to start by introducing the Center for Rural Affairs. Following that, we will hear from Matt Frana, the Watershed Project Coordinator for the Winneshiek County Soil and Water Conservation District. And then we will follow that by a discussion with him. And our second speaker today is Joel Zook, a farm energy planner with the Winneshiek County Energy District. And we'll have a discussion with him after his presentation. And at the end of the event today, we'll open it up for a question and answer from the audience. So if you are watching this event on Facebook, you can add your questions in the comment box, and my colleague Teresa will move the questions over to here on Zoom. And if you're here on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat box at the bottom. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible. As you can see, this event is being recorded. We will send you a link to the recording after the event so you can rewatch it, along with a short survey that we would love to have your input on. All right, next slide, please. To introduce you to the Center for Rural Affairs, we have a 48-year history of working directly with farmers and ranchers, providing training, technical assistance, and building networks. The Center for Rural Affairs was established in 1973 in Watt Hill, Nebraska, which is in northeast Nebraska, as an agriculture and rural advocate with a conscience. Our mission is to establish strong rural communities, social and economic justice, environmental stewardship, and genuine opportunity for all, while engaging people in decisions that affect the quality of their lives and the future of their communities. Over the years, we've expanded throughout Nebraska, and we have staff located across the state, as you can see on that map, as well as southeast South Dakota, southwest Minnesota, and here in central Iowa. On the next slide, it goes over our 4 state policy priorities outlined here. First being renewable energy, climate, water quality, and local meat processing. If you are interested in engaging with us on any of these topics, please feel free to visit our website to learn more and reach out to us at any time. All right, so our first guest speaker today is Matt Frana. As I said before, is a project coordinator with the Winneshiek County Soil and Water Conservation District, covering the Upper Iowa Watershed Project. So I will stop sharing my screen so that he can share his slides, and we will follow up with some discussion questions after he presents.
All right, is that showing up all right?
I cannot see your slides.
No, yeah, not yet. Okay, looks good. Now go to full screen.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, Matt Frana, working with on the Upper Iowa Watershed Project. It's kind of a project between the Upper Iowa Watershed Management Authority, and I'm also working with the Winneshiek County Soil and Water Conservation District on this. I've been working on this project for about 4 years now. Prior to that, I worked with the NRCS for 3 years as a soil conservationist, and then another 3 years as a wetland specialist. And then I guess prior to that, I did a position with the AmeriCorps and DNR together. That was a habitat specialist where I was working with landowners and improve wildlife habitat on their property. Just give you a quick little background on this grant and this project. The Upper Iowa Watershed was one of 9 watersheds in the state that got selected for a grant that's funded through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was awarded to the state under the title of the Iowa Watershed Approach for Urban and Rural Resilience. And what the Iowa watershed approach represents is a program through which Iowans are working together to address factors that contribute to flooding. And then in addition, it also partners with other statewide programs to reduce flooding and improve water quality, such as the Iowa Flood Mitigation Program and the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. And just to give you, so this watershed project may be a little bit different. Some other watershed projects that are typically more focused on nutrient reduction and soil loss. Kind of the main goal for this project was to implement like structural projects that can retain water in the landscape to reduce flooding. And so a lot of the project areas we're targeting with this tend to be like ponds and sediment basins, wetlands. But then in addition, we can also other projects like waterways or add to these projects to help, I guess, enhance the project itself. And I think the goal is we put these structures in the landscape and then are able to, during a heavy rain event, slow that water flow down to the main rivers where they flood out, and hopefully reduce that peak flow that causes the flood damage. So these are just a few of the projects that we've implemented so far, various sizes, but typically we're reducing stream flow through them by 50 to 90% on a 50-year rain event, and which that is about 6.5 inches every 24 hours, within 24 hours. So, and then in addition to that, we're also usually putting them in spots that maybe has some erosional issues. It might have been a gully. We're also, so this will also trap sediment coming off fields. There's probably some nutrient reduction values these as well, where it fits with the landowner objectives and kind of the situation of the project. We usually try to put some native prairie in spots to buffer the water areas. So just kind of incorporating various practices into the main goal project of reducing water flow. Another project type that we are targeting as well and working with the county and then adjacent landowners on is these road structures. And there's spots within the county where there's dips in the gravel roads, where the gravel roads can actually be raised up and used as a dam type structure. And then we modify that culvert. And so during heavy rain events, water can then be stored behind these roads, and then slowly released. And so they're not going straight down to the streams right away. So we have a couple of those that just started construction here in the last couple of weeks. And so they'll be working on those over the summer. We got 4 of them right now that are contracted, and a couple more that we're working through plans on, and hopefully get contracted yet this summer. And then another thing that's pretty important with not only flood reduction, but also nutrient reduction, soil loss is soil health and in organic matter, specifically within the soils, and what impact that has on water retention. And just to give you a kind of a background on Iowa has lost nearly 50%, or probably more in some cases, of its organic matter in its soils since European settlement. We used to have soils that generally range in 6 to 10% organic matter. Typically now we're seeing 2 to 4%. And this loss is mostly attributed to cropland tillage. And so when we till the soils, oxygen is stirred up in the soil, stimulates microbes and to decompose that organic matter at a higher rate. And so just to give you an idea what organic matter in the soil can do for water retention, 1% of organic matter in our soils can hold up to approximately 20,000 gallons of water per acre. And so there's conservation practices out there like no-till and cover crops that we can actually increase the organic matter in our soils instead of losing it. And typically studies have shown by implementing these systems, we can start to gain about a 10% of organic matter per year. And what that equates to is, so that would be essentially extra 2,000 gallons of water per acre per year, which is similar to what is stored in that fire truck. And I put that as a visual so you can see that by implementing these practices on a yearly basis, we could be adding one of those worth the water in our landscape. And if, across the whole watershed, if people were incorporating more of those practices, we could really see a difference in just water retention in our soils. And then that's not even, minimizing the soil loss and nutrients going to our streams. And then just to give you an idea of what a cover cropped and no-till field looks like compared to one that's been conventionally tilled, planted. Just a side-by-side comparison here. The one on the left obviously is cover crops, no-till, and the one on the right has been tilled. And after a large rain event, you can see how that rain just sits on top of the soil and likely runs off quickly, carrying soil or sediment and nutrients with it. And that just kind of quickly goes down to our streams. Where the one on the left that has the cover crops and no-till, that water is getting absorbed into the soil, infiltrating down. We're not losing that soil or the nutrients, and you're just holding more water in the landscape instead of going right down to the streams and rivers. And then just to give you another idea of kind of what Iowa was and what we've transformed it to, which has made us more susceptible to these large rain events, flooding. Iowa has drained nearly 90% of its wetlands, converted more than 99% of its original prairie to row crops or pavement. And so this transformation has made us less resilient, I guess. And so by adding more of that into the landscape, we can regain some of those benefits. Just to give you an idea of what prairie grasses and what they can do to be beneficial in our landscape. Their root systems are huge. Most of them have root systems anywhere from 6 to 12 feet deep and not only allow for water infiltration, but they also have these stiff stems that will slow water down as they enter these areas and trap sediment, trap nutrients instead of going right to our streams and rivers. And I just want to show you here, if you look on the far left, if you can see it, there's your lawn grass and kind of what the root system that it has compared to what the native vegetation would have. So you can really see quite a difference in, what our lawns, and that's really not promoting any sort of infiltration or anything like that. Where we incorporated these native plants, can really do a lot more in our landscape. And just to give you an idea of how we can kind of incorporate them into cropland, we can put them on contours and contour buffer strips, and filter our streams. And studies have been showing that adding just 10% of this native vegetation at strategic locations in our cropland, we can reduce water runoff by 40%. We can reduce sediment and nutrient runoff by 80 to 90%. And as mentioned, filter strips, contour buffers, field borders. Another thing, try to target areas that maybe aren't very productive in cropland, areas that maybe flood out more frequently or are susceptible to erosion, maybe just poor quality soils where the landowner really isn't making much of a profit off those acres. And those are the acres are first good to target. Easier to convince a farmer or landowner, all right, if we take this area out of production, your actual net benefit or your net profit per acre is going to increase, because you're sticking money into some areas that aren't really, you're not gaining any money off of, you're losing money off of. So we can plant these areas to native vegetation and get those benefits. And then in addition to the sediment, water, nutrient benefits you can get from it. Also, most of the times we have wildflowers in these mixes that help out pollinators, in addition to just other wildlife. So overall, I think these are a pretty good practice to be working with landowners on. And then this is just to give you an idea too of what adding these prairie strips to crop fields can do. This is a study done at the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge, and the plume or the flume on the left shows a field that is actually a no-till field too, that after a heavy rain event, how much soil came out of that one. That's 100% crops. The middle shows a field in a similar landscape that in a watershed that with just 10% prairie, how much soil loss had lessened. And then when we got 100% prairie, we see virtually no soil loss at all. But yeah, as far as resiliency and practices that we could be promoting to landowners, I guess that was just kind of the main ones that usually try to work with. I think they have the most advantages when it comes to flood resiliency, reducing soil loss, and nutrient reduction into our streams. But I guess that's was my main little spiel. Got some questions now. We can go over that.
Thanks, Matt. It was really informative. I'm going to go through a couple of questions. And again, just a reminder, if you do have questions, for those of you in the audience, please put those in the chat box if you're on Zoom. And if you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and put that in the comment section. And my colleague Teresa will be transferring those over here to Zoom. We'll try to get those answered at the end of the event. All right, first question for you, Matt. When you're connecting with farmers and landowners with cost share for conservation practices, what are the most common sources of funding for that cost share?
I guess what I've mainly been working with is the project funds that we've had for the Upper Iowa Watershed project. So in recent years, mostly been targeting, ponds and these things. And so we have funds for that. But as I'm talking to landowners, as mentioned, like, well, we want to put prairie in certain spots there, maybe outside our project area, or I'll chat with them about cover crops or doing other soil health practices if we're out in that farmer's land or landowner's property and seeing some maybe other concerning issues with erosion or something. And so, for native prairie, the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, is pretty good one. Would recommend going through that one first if you're eligible for it. Things like cover crops and no-till. There's some state cost share opportunities as well as some federal ones through like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And really, if you stop by the local NRCS office and just maybe talk to them about they have some conservation practices you'd want to implement on your property, or maybe don't even know for sure, but would like to have somebody come out and take a look at it. That would be, I guess, the route to go. And then you could also find out there, like with my project, I have certain specific sub watersheds within the Upper Iowa watershed that where my funds are eligible for, but there's also maybe other watershed projects going on that you're not aware of that would have potential additional funding sources for doing conservation practices. So if you're looking for that, I think the best place to start is just stopping by your local NRCS office and just seeing what's available.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Next question. How does your watershed plan for the Upper Iowa WMA guide your efforts to implement these types of practices?
Our watershed plan kind of got developed as this project was going on, so it wasn't used a whole lot specifically with this project and targeting the practices, but it will be really beneficial for future projects and selecting some watersheds to work in and keeping track of what we've done. What's really nice with our watershed plan is that it's actually online, so it's accessible to anybody. You can look it up at upperiowa.river.org. And another tool that's on there that's been pretty beneficial, I guess, too, is this ACPF tool. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a GIS tool that you can look down onto a farm property, cropland or whatever, and it's a tool where a model is run where it kind of gives you ideas. All right, where can we put in waterways? Where can we put in terraces or contour buffers? Sediment basins and ponds and wetlands and stuff. So it may not be 100% accurate, but it gives you some idea of where to start. And so, I can look at that and before going out and talk to the landowner, kind of give an idea. Otherwise, you can direct landowners to the website as well, and they can look it up on their own property and get an idea of where, all right, I don't have a waterway here, or I might contour buffer might work here in this area. So I think that's a pretty useful tool on that website and within the management plan.
Yeah, the ACPF stands for Agriculture Conservation Planning Framework. If someone can paste that in the chat, it's a really, really helpful resource as well. All right, next question. Outside of your direct watershed, what advice do you give to farmers and landowners who want to explore flood mitigation or water quality practices on their land? I know you've talked about going to your ICS office, maybe looking at that ACPF tool. Are there other pieces of advice that you can give?
I mean, that's probably your best starting point is going to the NRCS office if you're not for sure what you might be eligible for, maybe to get some ideas on some conservation practices you could put on your property. But I think that's probably your best starting point, and then going from there, you can kind of look to different funding sources and what best fits what your goals are with the property, I guess.
Definitely. All right, last question here. Looking forward, what challenges do you face in your work, and how can those of us in the presentation today, including farmers, landowners, and the Center for Rural Affairs specifically, do to advance your objectives?
Mainly just be aware of, what are some of these environmental concerns that we have in our state? What are some of the conservation practices that we can do to address these? And then kind of just being aware, learning more about it, and just looking for ways to implement them or promote them, and then also too, just supporting legislature that backs, these conservation efforts, that's aware of, the nutrient reduction strategy or flood mitigation efforts, and try to back those people as well, or at least inform those people too, so that they are making decisions and policies that, I guess, help with the conservation and resilience within the Iowa landscape. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you. Thanks, Matt, for sharing your perspective here. And again, if you have any questions for Matt, please put those in the chat and we'll try to get to those at the end of the presentation. Next, we're going to move on to our next guest speaker. Our next guest speaker is Joel Zook, an energy planner for the Winneshiek County Energy District, and he will be presenting on the process of a farm energy audit and what options are available for farmers looking to cut out energy costs.
All right, thanks, Kayla. Thanks for having me. I'm going to try to share my screen here if I can get that to work. Looks like someone is sharing their screen already. There we go. Great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about saving energy on the farm and how that can help out in the grand scheme of things in terms of, dollars in your pocketbook is going to make your operation more resilient. And of course, having lower energy usage on the farm is going to make you less concerned about price spikes or LP shortages. If you can take your LP storage on hand and get more dried or more done with that, it'll make things easier. We've had a couple harvest seasons in the past number of years where we've either seen prices spike or we're just where we can't actually get delivery just because the demand has been so high. So making sure that you're as efficient as you can will help out with that. Just a quick talk about what we'll go over today. We'll just talk about practices first. What practices I see when I'm doing an energy audit for a farm, what some of my top recommendations are, and some possible funding sources that folks might want to look into if they're interested in making these improvements themselves. So I almost always start with lighting because it's just simply the easiest from a cost perspective and from a project management. A lot of times lighting is just a one-for-one swap out of your existing fixtures, and LEDs can drop your usage from lighting in half. So almost any other type of lighting out there is going to use twice as much energy per light output than LEDs, except for maybe incandescent lamps, which are even less efficient. So upgrading these is incredibly cost effective even before considering rebates. On top of that, the EQIP, which we'll talk more about later, that's available through NRCS, the cost share for lighting is very good. And that can be used in conjunction with rebates that you can get from utilities, which aren't what they used to be, but they are something. And a lot of times, depending on the project, if it's not an entirely complex project, cost share and the rebates can together almost cover the entire cost of lighting upgrades. So I'm always recommending lighting upgrades first. Almost every farm can benefit from lighting upgrades. Oops, let's see if I can, and zoom and not inside my PowerPoint anymore. So can make it an advanced slide. So just a quick example, dairy farms are a great example of where lighting upgrades just can pay for themselves incredibly quickly because they've got a lot of big fixtures, a large number of them, and they're running a long time of the day. So, a dairy farm can see less than a 2-year payback even before counting any incentives. And I always recommend that regardless of what the payback on things are, you upgrade your lights to LEDs simply because they can reduce your operating expenses of changing out lights or changing out ballast of your old fixtures. Getting things replaced to LEDs is really good. And the way NRCS has their cost share set up, as long as your lighting practices is cost effective as a whole, you can include and get cost share even on some less efficient individual lamps. Grain drying is another huge energy use on the farm. It's probably one of the main reasons I'm getting folks calling me that are looking at a project already is upgrading the grain dryer. So the big savings potential, and I mentioned this before, but a more efficient grain dryer can protect you from LP price spikes or from shortages when delivery is a problem. So this, of course, numbers will vary from farm to farm, but depending on the age and the efficiency of your existing dryer, a new model can oftentimes see those costs drop on the LP side by 20 to 30%. And so that can be a whole lot of LP, especially when you compare that to, the amount that it could heat, 10 or 15 homes in a year. And just in the savings is pretty impressive. And just, kind of a high level figure out there, the way NRCS and REAP are set up is that they'll score people higher based on the amount of cost effectiveness. And so any farm that's drying over 100,000 bushels a year is going to usually score very well on EQIP and REAP. That's not a hard, fast number, but typically folks that I'm seeing with numbers of drying that much per year are getting awarded their cost share. There are incentives as well available for space heating. And of course, if you're using a lot for heating your shop or any other buildings on your farm, you should be definitely looking at insulation. There are incentives for insulation as well as for air sealing, making the building more airtight. And there are incentives for heating equipment as well. So taking a look at those, space heating is definitely something that gets looked at during an energy audit. And just a little bit of a greenhouse specific. There are specific to greenhouse envelope incentives. So if you have a greenhouse or you know someone who does out there, there's rebates for upgrading from a single poly layer to a double poly layer to cut down on heating bills. And of course, greenhouses are huge energy users as well on lighting and heating equipment. And So we've worked with a couple greenhouses in the past number of years on making some upgrades. This one in particular is at least gonna try on this next REAP application for replacing some of their propane usage with geothermal. So that's an exciting project, and see how they are moving forward with that ahead. There are incentives for water heating as well. Dairy farms are typically the only farm where water heating is a large expense, but that's certainly worth looking into if that's getting used. You know, a farm energy audit is just going to take a look at all energy use on the farm, and so we'll take a look at all uses. I'm going to go through these next couple of slides quickly, not bore everybody here on the intricacies of farming on the energy efficiency on the dairy side of things. But I will talk quickly about how dairies can save money and energy on cooling their milk, which is an important part of their business, and how they can do that efficiently, and what some of the practices out there, best practices for getting that milk cooled using as little energy as possible. So some of these slides might look familiar. I know that some of those folks were on the ISU webinar that I helped give yesterday. So in its basic form, you know, the cow is making hot milk. It's 100 degrees and it's getting pumped to a bulk tank, and they're going to have to refrigerate that. So that's the process that is very most simple, but it puts a lot of load on that refrigeration compressor to cool all that milk. So the very simplest thing that most farms have is a plate cooler that's using well water to cool the milk down. And that can take that milk down to 55 degrees from about 100 degrees. And so they're just passing water through one end of this plate exchanger and milk through the other. Those products aren't mixing, but they're exchanging heat. And this can save on 40 to 50% of cooling costs. And you know, almost in every case, this is the well water is well water that's going to be used anyways, either for washing or for watering livestock, and so that's saved in a tank. And generally, that's nicer. It's not as cold, especially in the winter, for when you're washing things down. And livestock like to drink that slightly warmed water. So plate coolers are pretty common on dairy farms. Most everybody has one, but if you don't, of course, that's something that you can be looking at getting. That really does cut down a whole lot on your energy use on cooling that milk. So that's what that process looks like with the plate cooler inside it. Another thing that is less common, but it's a really good thing to be looking at, is a variable speed pump on the milk pump. So when cows are getting milked, that milk goes into a receiver tank, and then it gets pumped out into the bulk tank. And so a variable speed pump saves more energy by being more energy efficient on the electric side of things as well. But the important thing, and where most of the savings is that it puts milk across that plate cooler at a lower speeds. And so more water and more heat is exchanged, and they can get milk cooled within 4 to 5 degrees of well water temperature, which just further lowers the amount of energy used by that tank. Another good thing, and this is, you know, applicable to most dairies as well, is that you can actually take that hot refrigerant from your compressor and run that through a water tank. And so that water tank will absorb that heat. That makes your refrigeration system more efficient, but you're basically capturing that waste heat and you're using it to preheat water. So the water goes from well water temperature up to 110 degrees or so, and the water heater takes care of heating it the rest. There's variable speeds for the vacuum pump as well when they're making the vacuum, the suction that you need to make those milkers work. So a variable speed pump on that will cut energy considerably as well. And of course, you can upgrade the compressors. So upgrading an older reciprocating compressor to a new scroll compressor is a way to cut down on energy usage by 15 to 20% as well. And this is not something that typically is recommended for folks to do right away, because it's actually better to save energy kind of further up the chain. But when you're replacing your compressor, you should be definitely looking at a scroll compressor. And so look at incentives that are available to you to do that when you're looking at it, replacing your equipment at the end of its lifetime. Here's what that looks like. It looks a little complicated when we add all those things in, but we end up with a much more efficient system. We're still getting our milk cool. It's cooling it faster. So there's a lot of benefits besides energy efficiency is there as well. So a little bit about funding sources on the energy efficiency side before I talk about solar. The main source that I'm seeing and the projects that I'm working on are folks that are interested in signing up for EQIP. So EQIP is offered by the NRCS office. It stands for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And this is the same cost share program that many folks might be aware of. It can help fund cover crops or terraces or other structure practices. But they do have an on-farm energy initiative as well. And so the cost share for these energy efficiency practices is quite good. The funding cycle is sort of a once or twice per year application. And it is limited to efficiency only, not renewable energy. So it's an important distinction between that and another program, REAP, which is another USDA program, Rural Energy for America program. Many people might have heard of a neighbor or someone that they know who has gotten a REAP grant for upgrading a dryer or for putting in solar. REAP can be used to cover either or both energy efficiency and renewable energy. And we'll talk more about tax incentives later when we talk about solar, but that is where the incentives are on the solar side of things, is really on the tax incentives. So both EQIP and REAP should start with an on-farm energy assessment. And I'll just note that NRCS actually provides cost share for improvements, but they provide cost share for energy audits as well. So if you're interested in getting an energy audit for your farm, talk with your folks at the NRCS office, tell them you're interested in an energy audit. Depending on your time frame, they may recommend that you apply for cost share for an energy audit so that you can help getting cost share on the energy audit itself. Or you might pay for that energy audit fully out of pocket so that you can kind of accelerate that process and make sure that you're in line for the application deadline in the fall for actually applying for cost share on improvements. My recommendation is now that you sign up this summer and talk to folks at the NRCS office now and get your application on file. They do have 2 annual or twice per year signups in the fall and in the spring. But a lot of the money goes out the door in the fall, and the spring is sort of used as the leftover funds. So especially if you're applying for actual practices, you should sign up now to meet the fall deadline. You're gonna have a much better chance of getting those dollars now than in the spring sign up. I mentioned this, but you do need an energy audit report to qualify for REAP or EQIP. EQIP is a little bit more specific about the criteria that they require for that energy audit. REAP can be a little bit loose, but especially if you're applying for energy efficiency on the REAP side of things, you probably want an energy audit as well. And a note that you can apply for both REAP and EQIP, but you can only use one funding source. I've had some clients that have applied for both just sort of to double their chances at getting funded. And they've been awarded both, but they need to accept one and decline the other. And you can choose that way what funding source works best for you. They have a little bit of different program rules. But folks at the NRC office are good folks to talk to about that. So as we get into solar, I just want to mention today that we're talking about solar photovoltaic, so solar PV that makes electricity. We're not talking about solar hot water for space or water heating. Solar hot water heating is an interesting practice, but it's got a lot of moving parts, and a lot of times I think that the solar electric is where you should focus on first, at least in terms of being able to make your own electricity. It's going to generally end up with a lower payback time and less of a maintenance schedule than your solar thermal well. So one reminder when I'm talking to anybody about solar, I always remind people to consider energy efficiency first, because it is almost always cheaper to save energy than to produce it yourself. Another thing is that, is that you want to consider energy efficiency improvements when you're sizing your solar system. If you're a farm that's going to drop your usage by 10 or 20%, you want to make sure that you're sizing your solar system to meet your new lower expected energy usage than your current usage. A lot of times the way the utilities will have things set up is that there's a benefit for you to size your system up to meeting your actual energy usage. But if you size larger than that, you're going to leave dollars on the table or sell energy back to them at a far reduced cost. So you generally want to meet but not exceed your energy usage. And so you want to take into effect any energy efficiency improvements that you're going to make when you're sizing that system. Another way to say that, another way to look at that from kind of a different angle is a lot of people want to make 100% of their own energy, or at least their own electricity on their farm, just because it feels really good to do so. And so just for example, if someone was going to spend $50,000 on a solar system, it's very possible that they could meet 100% of their energy needs with that. But maybe there's a $2,000 or $3,000 lighting improvement project that can save a good deal of energy, just drops their energy by 20%. And then they can put in a $40,000 system. So now they've met their goal of producing 100% of their electricity on farm. But instead of doing it with a $50,000 solar system, they've done so with a $40,000 solar system and a $2,000 lighting upgrade. So same goal is met. It was done with more efficiency and less dollars. So an important question to ask yourself when you're considering solar for your farm or for your home is, what is your electric utility solar policy? Are they going to pay you for the energy produced? Both of our big investor-owned utilities in Iowa, Mid-American Energy and Alliant Energy, will offer some sort of net metering, which is they give you equal value for energy that you sell back to them that they're charging for you. So that's really good. That's called net metering. Not all of the rural electric co-ops in Iowa will do that. And so you'll need to ask them, what's their buyback rate? Some folks will only pay 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour, even though they're charging you 12, 10, 15 cents a kilowatt hour for when you're buying power from them. So the other thing is if you can't net meter it, what is the cost of your electricity? That's obviously going to affect your payback time. And if net metering is not an option, can you use it all yourself? Can you size your solar so that that energy is going to stay on your farm, not be sold back to the utility? You're going to get a bigger bang for your buck if you can size your system to meet those kind of criteria. I mentioned before, a lot of utilities offer net metering. What that does is it gives you a kilowatt hour credit for energy you've produced. And so you get that full retail value. When you sell energy back to the grid, it's going to go power your neighbors' homes or farms. And you're basically able to use that credit at the end of the month. I see I'm getting tight on time here, so I'll go real quick on this. I worked with the Iowa Dairy Center at NICC in Calmer, and so their utility limits solar net metering to 40 kW, so maybe about 80 panels, 100 panels. They've got a couple options when they're looking at that. They really want to be able to produce all of their systems energy with solar, but they could easily net meter, and this might be the most economical way to do it, is just to meet their utilities net metering cap, but that would only provide 20% of their usage. They could look and do a study at how are their systems, how their farms peak loads is happening, and so can they line up their energy usage with their solar so that they're not actually selling any or very little energy back to their utility? And I don't have their hourly data, but I said that maybe they could do about 70 to 100 kW, and this could offset about half their usage. Or they could, if they really wanted to set off 100% of their annual needs, they could put in, almost 300 kW of solar, which would be the worst payback, and they'd end up selling a lot of power back to their REC at 3 or 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So they're going to think about this. They're undertaking a net zero energy initiative, and they're really looking at how they could be a net zero energy facility as an example to dairies across the Midwest. So I'd love to update you with that later. But talking about incentives, big thing now is that federal tax credit is 26% of the total system cost. There's no upper limit on that through the end of this year. It drops to 22% the year next year, and then drops to 10% for farms and businesses, but goes away for homeowners completely. A quick side note, the Iowa tax credit is currently 11% of the cost, but I would not count on that because the state legislature did not renew any allocation of dollars for that. And they set that program up at the beginning. They have a $5 million per year cap that they would send out to that tax credit. And there's already a waiting list for all the dollars that have been approved. But importantly for any farms or businesses on today, in addition to the actual federal tax credit, which isn't going anywhere, at least not ahead of schedule, and there is no cap on it. In addition to that tax credit, you can depreciate the cost of your solar, which after doing some math and taking some assumptions, your mileage may vary, but offsets about another 22% of system costs. So that really does cut down on payback considerably for farms and businesses. Just a quick note on financing. There are financing options available for you. If you've got a good site for solar, it's very possible that your principal and your interest payments on your solar loan could be less expensive than the actual energy savings you're going to see from solar. Okay. I believe you had some questions for me.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I have a couple of questions here, and then we'll open it up for the audience to ask theirs. Okay, first question, who can farmers go to in their own areas of the state to learn more about whether an energy audit can help them become more resilient?
Yeah, I recommend that you talk with your local NRCS office. There's one in every county, and they will help you through the EQIP program. And while they're not dealing with REAP directly, they can certainly get you started on the right path there.
Okay, so NRCS for either watershed practices?
Yeah, both. Everyone should just stop in at the NRCS office. I will say as well, you know, as far as getting an energy audit, NRCS does keep a list of technical service providers. You'll find me on that list that provides energy audits, but there's a number of them across the state, and you can look up to your county specific area, which of those technical service providers are providing energy audits.
Perfect. All right, next question here. When you first approach farmers about the possibility of performing a farm energy audit, how does that conversation usually go? And do you have any tips for farmers here in the audience who may be interested in this process about how to approach this process and any expertise that they need in the process?
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of times folks are coming to me with one project in mind. You know, I've got a lighting project, I've got a grain dryer project. A lot of people are coming to me with grain dryer projects. And, you know, NRCS really takes a full kind of whole farm approach to energy and requires that the energy audit take a look at all energy usage on the farm. So I just say, you know, keep an open mind. We'll certainly evaluate the project that you've got, but there could be other projects out there that you don't want to, you haven't thought about and you don't want to let go on. Most people have a pretty good idea of farm energy use, but, you know, occasionally I will get someone who thinks they need a new grain dryer. We'll run some numbers for them and we'll say, you know, the grain dryer doesn't look all that great from a cost perspective, but you might want to be considering these other projects. And I will talk with farmers about solar as well. Not everybody is thinking solar, and they maybe have heard of that, but I'm always giving people numbers on that just to give them a rough estimate on, you know, hey, maybe you should look at this a little bit deeper. If you're thinking about a system, maybe it's got a 9-year payback for your farm and it's got a 25-year warranty. That's a pretty good deal to be considering, in addition to anything else that you've already started with.
Definitely. Final question here, and then we'll look through the chat here. How can local officials in your area promote the work you're doing, and who can be the strongest messengers to spread the word on these practices?
Well, if we're talking local officials more broadly, it'd be great if the state legislator would consider at least funding the folks on the solar tax credit waiting list who thought they were going to get a solar tax credit. And it'd be great too. I mean, the federal tax credit is set to expire in the next number of years. If they could think about increasing funds to match half of that, which is what the state tax credit had been doing on its current phase out schedule. Solar is going to be fine. It's still cost effective, but it is a real shame to leave people waiting on that waiting list. And we can certainly use a boost in the local economies now. There's a lot of jobs that are take to put solar panels up, and it's great. It's great for the local economy. On energy efficiency more broadly, I think awareness is a huge thing. Just making sure that folks know about it. If you are getting energy efficiency projects done yourself, tell your farmers, friends that you know, and your neighbors about how these projects worked out and how you were able to see those savings. Because word of mouth goes a long ways.
Definitely. All right, I'm gonna look through the chat here at some questions that came in. All right, first question for Joel. How did farmers dry their corn traditionally before fossil fuels?
Well, I think they left it on the cob and stacked it in grain bins and let it air dry. Yeah. I mean, even before that, I guess, I mean, a lot of older grain bins are air dry only systems, which, it's efficient as long as the corn isn't wet, and as long as it's not just, it works some years and it doesn't others.
Definitely. All right, next question here. This is more of a comment, I think, but I've heard that in hot climates, crops grown under PVs can do well with some shading, as well as cooling the PVs, which can yield more kilowatts. Have you, Joel, have you?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that you guys have done some great work on even just pollinator plantings under solar panels and how that can cool compared to short mown grass. I don't know I mean, I imagine you'd have to have some sort of specialty crop growing under a solar panel, but that's more of a labor intensive practice than row cropping. So.
Yeah, we've got some great resources on our website about pollinator friendly solar. If you want to look at the energy section on the Center for Rural Affairs website, you can find lots of great resources there. Next question here. Question for Matt. What can local elected officials such as county supervisors and mayors do to be a stronger partner with the work you're doing?
I guess just be aware of maybe how land use above their communities may be impacting them as far as maybe flooding. I know that there's heard of some communities, where they maybe get water from the river nearby or something that's getting more and more nitrates in it, so they're having to do more to treat that, and so that they're actually going out and getting involved in programs to get landowners above them to implement practices that reduce nutrients going into that water. And then also too, just thinking about, all right, not only what's going on upstream, and maybe being aware that potentially if there's a project that they could help fund that would benefit the community as well, but then also being aware of what goes on downstream from their community. And so, maybe limiting construction or on floodplains, what can actually be built out there. And then also too, promoting practices within the communities, such as rain gardens or maybe permeable pavement, reducing just fertilizer use on lawns, and just things like that, that even within towns and communities that they can be doing things to improve the conditions downstream from them.
Definitely. Thanks. Question for Joel. Does an on-farm wind turbine of any size make sense?
Well, solar has really taken over any renewable energy production that's customer owned. Wind has really moved into a sort of there's a lot of economies of scale with wind, where solar is really economical at all scales because it's such a small modular piece of equipment. So utilities are able to produce low cost wind, but they're, have big, tall wind turbines, and they've got, 20 of them in a row, and it makes it easy to come out and service them all at once. So the benefit to solar over small wind, or really wind of any size, just as an independent producer, is that there aren't any moving parts, and that the warranty on them is for 20 or 25 years. And so it's a cheap, reliable way to make electricity. It doesn't have a maintenance schedule.
Definitely. All right, last chance for questions. I've got one more for you, Joel. In your work, do you find that public programs such as the Rural Energy for America program are easy to navigate for a farm energy audit? And I would assume they mean for implementation as well.
Yeah, yes and no. One of the things about REAP is that it does have an application that a lot of times kind of required hiring a grant writer to help you out. And I know that they've implemented a streamlined process now. And so I guess we'll know more this year about how that works as far as being able to you really should be able to do the easier process yourself. EQIP is a great program, but it's just on a long time schedule. And so that really requires you, if you're going to benefit from that program, to be planning ahead of time. It's not a good program if you've got equipment that is failing. It won't cost share for equipment that you're paying for in advance and applying for it after. But that is the approach that they're taking, I think, on purpose, is that they want to be proactive about planning and doing a farm energy audit first, and taking a look at the whole energy use on the farm, and doing a real comprehensive sort of wraparound look at energy use.
Definitely. And one funny question that was copied from the top: has anyone considered partnering with beavers to minimize flooding?
It's nothing that's being targeted, but I do agree that I've thought about that quite a bit, actually. If we just released a bunch of beavers and let them do their thing, we probably could do quite a bit for not only flooding, but nutrient reduction. They'd be making wetlands and stuff. And so,
yeah, definitely. It's funny. But thanks
Yeah,
everyone for your questions. And thanks again for joining us for today's Building Resiliency on the Farm event. And thanks to our guest speakers today, Matt Frana and Joel Zook. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. For those participants in the audience, you will be receiving a link to the recording, and you will also get a link for a short survey that we would love for you to fill out for us. And if you are not already, please subscribe to our newsletters at the Center for Rural Affairs and follow us on social media to stay in touch with us and all of our work. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks for having us.